Okay guys, now we have finally some data so that we know what's going on in that magma chamber underneath Santorini. And this is interesting. So what this video is about, I can tell you, a magma intrusion, the amount in the magma chamber, the earthquakes, of course, an inflation and a deflation. And then the conclusion what this might be. So there has been an update has been released with the headline, basically, update note on ground deformation at Santorini with a preliminary calculation of the volume of magma that might be involved in the ongoing seismo-volcanic crisis. This update has been conducted by the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in France, the National Observatory of Athens, University of Patras, Department of Geology, the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, Department of Geology and Geoenvironment. So people that should know what they're doing. And another headline of their update is Santorini Seismo-Volcanic Event, GNSS time series and preliminary models. And that's what we will look at in this video. And we will dissect it piece by piece because it gives us a valuable overview what's going on underneath Santorini. And again, I still haven't seen any data coming in from the Kolumbo underwater volcano. That is just 4 miles off the coast, 7 kilometers off the coast of Santorini. And they found a magma chamber. They called it surprise magma chamber last year in December. I've reported about this. That is at a shallow depth and that is filling up gradually and has an equal fill amount that it had when Kolumbo last erupted. And Kolumbo is really a bad one that can produce a lot of bad stuff. And the current seismic crisis, the seismic storm, is basically around that Kolumbo area, the main crater and several smaller craters. So they have installed seismic stations last year and 4 more just currently. But where is the data? One problem that I see, and we'll get into this right now, is that different companies or different institutions and entities seem to own different stations, and it seems they're not really working together or they're not getting all the data. You've seen it in my last video. Basically, they're not sure how many GNSS stations they have on Santorini. So I'll show you this graphic here again, because now at least they have given us an update, which ones are theirs and that the other ones do not exist anymore. Look at this map here. What you see is Santorini is the crater of Santorini. And you see in the middle that little island with the 2 yellow dots. That's where we've seen an eruption in the 1950s. And this is the area that also looks basically like a volcanic crater full of volcanic ash. Looks really like end of days scenarios. And then you see these 2 volcanoes. So the big volcano that we see here, this is what happened in 2011, the land rise. And then 2024, this is where they have detected the land rise right now. And then you see these yellow dots and the red dots. So the red dots are the ones that we will analyze today, the data of the red dots. So the most interesting one for us, of course, is the SANT, the SANT station, because it's the closest to that inflation that they're showing here. And then we have one here, basically in the middle of that big island area here. And then we have Sanu, that is down here. And unfortunately, really unfortunately, look at how many measuring stations they had for the event of the 2011-2012 unrest. But after the unrest ended, they were removed in the following years. So we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now we only have 3. But look at this map. I've shown it to you before. There seem to be more stations, but the scientists say they don't really know who owns them or if they really exist, and they haven't received any data. So the owners of these stations, if they still exist, do not collaborate And I'm wondering, is this the same at Kolumbo? Who has installed? Who owns them? That will be interesting. So, but what we will look at today, what is happening at Sand Station, what is happening here, and what is happening here. Are there any movements upwards, downwards, or north, south, east, west? That's what we want to know so that we can get a better picture what's going on with that land rise here and of course the magma chamber underneath. So I'd like you to have a look at this graph here. They call it the time series of 2022 till 2025 of this Sand Station, the 048A station that's in the middle, and the Sano station that I showed you on the bottom. And what this is the longitude time series of these three stations. And just to clarify what we're looking at, longitude is the measurement of how far east or west a location is from the prime meridian. So it's a geographic coordinate that helps determine a location on Earth. And we want to see, is this land rise moving or is a deflation moving? What is going on? So what we see here, it starts out here January 2022, so nothing really has changed. So then we're going into summer of 2024, basically July of 2024, when we see at all three stations that something is moving. And of course, since we know where the land rise now is, the highest part of the land rise, this is at the Sand Station. This is the one with the black dots here. That's why the movement is more extreme than it is at the Hepos or Uranus station. They call them here, they give him Metrica, Hepos, and Uranus. It's easier to say. So, but all three until January, they little bit probably after January, it shows that it is moving, something's happening. And then they're giving us another graph here for the latitude time series. So also again, latitude is also a geographic coordinate that measures how far north or south of the equator a location is. It's expressed as an angle between 0 degrees at the equator and 90 degrees at the north and south poles. So basically what we've seen, the first diagram, that was basically, I'm going back here, that was the movement. Yeah, and this is the most interesting always for me, is the elevation time series. How much is it going up? We know it's moving north, south, east, west, but how much is it going up? And it starts in January. And as I said before, the interesting one is the Sand Station because it's closest to the detected land rise. And we also see that starting in January 2024, it starts going up, and it starts drastically going up at the Sand Station, basically from 60 millimeters to over 100 millimeters. Not that much on the two other ones because they're further away, but also if there is a land rise, if there's a magma chamber growing underneath the surface, that spreads out in different areas, right? Over a larger area, it depends, right? But it tells us definitely the main area is where the Sand Station is located, where we've seen that smaller volcano on the map. And then they're giving us an update of the time series of Sand. Latest data that they received was February 11th. So this is all three together, basically the upwards movement, the movement to the north, and the movement to the northeast. And think about the seismic swarm. The seismic swarm was moving northeast quite a bit since the last few days, or since it began, basically. Is that connected? They're talking about a deflationary trend that began around January 20th, accelerates. And the fast movement towards the northeast, that began on January 29th is continuing. So we know there was another smaller seismic swarm that ended on January 25th. And the new swarm started on January 26th, that we know now, but the seismic stations basically just began catching it on January 29th or even a day later. So that's why they say it began on January 29th. And so the question is, we know it's moving north, very strongly north, also strongly to the east, and it has accelerated. So something is accelerating that's causing this movement. But there is a deflationary trend. And there is the question, we know something. If you watch my channel, if you follow my channel, what's going on in Iceland currently is a good example, because this event has repeated itself almost every month since it started in November 2023. And November 23 is especially interesting because there was no eruption, but magma did leave the magma chamber. So what was happening, there was a magma chamber underneath the area that's called Svartsengi, and that magma chamber was filling up. It was filling up with magma from a deeper magma reservoir. And it's like stretching a rubber band. I can stretch it, I can stretch it, I can stretch it until it reaches the point of maximum elasticity. And if that point is reached and I put more pressure on it, it bursts. And that's the case with magma chambers. Then the rocks around it have no elasticity anymore. There's no more room to expand for the magma chamber to get bigger. That's when it sends the magma on its way. And it doesn't mean that the magma will reach the surface. So it's called a magma intrusion. If magma basically stays underneath the ground and is moving around without finding a way to the surface. Magma is always taking the way of least resistance. And if there's like areas where magma can intrude and brittle rocks and stuff like this, it'll do that. But we know if there's a magma intrusion happening, the land rise that's above that magma chamber, because if a balloon underneath the ground is being blown up, the ground lifts up. But if there's air going out of the balloon, the ground subsides. So we have a deflation. So the question is here, that deflation matches the start of that. Does that match the start of the second earthquake swarm? Well, they're not really precise with their data here, right? This is the end of 2024. So yeah, this could be the case. So, and another thing that we need to know, if magma is on the move, it rumbles. That's when the earthquakes are happening. We've seen that in Iceland on November 10th with that magma intrusion. It was forming a 15-kilometer long magma dike that went far away from the magma chamber into Grindavik and into the sea north-south. And that's where we saw the earthquakes rumbling, because it's like a miner. The magma needs to build a tunnel, like miners need explosives, machines. It's rumbling. That's why the earth was shaking so heavily. So the question is here, is this a magma intrusion? Is this why it's shaking so much? But then it's a very long lasting one. Problem is there's so many fault lines all over the place where we see this earthquake swarm. So could that activate a fault line that prolongs this shaking or intensifies it? Then there's more room for magma and it starts flowing again, and then another fault line is activated, something like this. And as the headline of this paper says, the seismic and volcanic events, right? So and we're looking at the magma right now. So deflationary trend, this is what we see here. And then they're showing us something that is interesting. That's another graph here. That's the time series only for 2025. So up north and east also of the Sand station, in that area where we have the land rise. And now you might ask, well, the news all the last few days were that they have detected a land rise underneath Santorini, basically underneath that little island in the middle. And I'll quickly show you these two maps. where they have the GNSS data, the two, like ascending orbit and descending orbit, these pictures. I explained it in my last video. Check it out. It's really interesting. I'll put it in the end screen. So basically make an overlay of these two pictures, and then where the red areas are, this is where they detected land rise. And so look at this graph here that starts in January. So we are here, that's the up curve, right? In January. So where's the end of January? That's basically here. So we do have January 29th. This is when the earthquake swarm started. We do have somewhat a deflationary trend already, and then it deflates, and then it starts rising a little bit, and then it really deflates. That kind of matches, I mean, it's hard to tell which day exactly that was, but I know we had very high earthquake activity with the magnitude 5.3 at that time. So was there more magma coming out of that magma chamber? And now we see an increase again. So what can happen? Magma chamber reaches point of maximum elasticity, sends magma on the way, and then there's room again. So there's room from magma from deeper depth to fill that up again. And once that starts, you see the land rise again. And same thing in Iceland. We saw the eruption. As soon as the eruption ended, the land started to rise again. Then another eruption, subside. And then another eruption, it started to rise until the next eruption, until it was full again. So is this something that we see here? So I think we need to wait a few more days to see if this is really continuing upwards. But what we definitely see in January here, to the north and to the east, like the earthquake swarm. So that raises the question, how can many scientists, especially in Greece, be so sure that this is purely tectonic? Yeah, are they tectonic plates that are moving around that could cause a land rise? But they're talking about a land rise underneath Santorini caused by magma. And now let's have a look at the other station that's in the middle, basically, of that island, Hepos. So this also starts here in January 24. Everything stays the same sort of thing. And then July 2024, we can see a small upwards trend, like 20 millimeters here in that range. And this is how it was moving north. And this is how it was moving east. So after it was moving south here, it's accelerating, really accelerating. Data is till February 9th, so I think this is probably also January 29th here. It would be nice if they would include the important dates here. It would make things easier. It's accelerating. It's also moving to the north, and we see a little bit of an increase here, but it's going up and down and up and down. But now it's definitely ranging between 160 and a little over it and 140 millimeters in upwards trend, versus here it was more in the 150, between 140. So it's still up, but not that much. And then they're giving us the Hepos station. That's the one that's the furthest away from the detected land rise in the south. And they're also starting in January and in 25 this year. So it was all, going up and down, but there is a deflationary trend, but it's also now accelerating, moving north and moving east. So it can happen, and that's also what we've seen in Iceland. If there's this magma dike, this magma intrusion, it forms valleys maybe to the left and right of a magma intrusion where the land can subside. So the question is this the case here? But they only have the data, I think, 3 days less than the other one. So it doesn't give us super clarity, but I think, especially for the ones that have been watching all my Iceland videos, We know what that means, guys, right? So I'm not so super optimistic that this is only tectonic. The good thing is, if it was just a magma intrusion and enough magma did flow out, it'll take a while till the magma chamber is full again, and then it should stop somewhat, unless now the other fault lines are triggered and keep rumbling. Or we have like an intrusion, which is kind of unusual, which we see more often at an eruption, that we have a balanced flow. That means lava's coming out at the eruption site and the magma chamber is being refilled gradually by a deeper laying magma source. So what comes from deep below flows to the magma chamber and right out into the eruption site. But even then, the earthquakes stop somewhat because the flow path has already been built. The miners built the tunnel, so why should it rumble that much? And that's the thing here. Usually before an eruption or an intrusion, you have an earthquake swarm with increasing earthquakes, a big cluster, and then poof, eruption, and it gets quiet. But it's not getting quiet here. And that's the big elephant in the room still. But here comes the but that could reverse the whole theory when they're giving us this information, the station's velocities before and during the beginning of the unrest until January 19th. So there was an average volcanic activity or velocity for east, north, and up. East was 7.4. North was minus 15.5 and up was 0.7 millimeters per year. So they say the average uplift rate of these 0.7 millimeters per year exists also after the unrest in 2011 and 2012. There was another earthquake swarm that seemed to have had a magma intrusion, and it was definitely magmatic. So basically what they're saying is that there are always anomalies in the measuring stations that can show various data. So the interesting thing is that they're saying what they're having here in this table, they're looking at the start dates here and the end dates. So they have only taken a certain time frame out of these graphs that we just looked at to minimize for each of the stations the differences between the observations and modeling. So, and this is what they're saying, assuming a constant rate of inflation. A constant rate of inflation. So the conclusion that they're coming to is, and that's the interesting thing that they're saying here, the inflation period as deducted from the combination of information provided by the three stations is 170 days. And this period runs from August 1st, 2024 to February 24th, 2025. So it's still running. That's what it's saying, basically. It's still running another week and a half. Okay, guys, and now look at this picture again. Look at this graph. What they're doing is they have basically calculated the azimuth of the deformation. So what is that, guys? This refers to the direction of a deformation. And it's measured basically as an angle, and that's what you see here with the red lines, clockwise from the true north. So it's essentially what this does is indicating the horizontal plane where the deformation is occurring. It tells you the compass direction in which the deformation is taking place. So that's why if you see from all three stations, this is where they're crossing, and this is where they're locating the source of the deformation of 2024. There's the source of deformation for 2011, but this is where they say this deformation started. So they are moving the location from here to here. Interesting, right? And now they can tell us the depth of the source. Where is the magma chamber? What they're saying is the sun station is located very close to the rim of the caldera and therefore might suffer from side effects from the amplitude of its vertical displacements. So they said they only used the angles from the two other stations to determine this, and they come up with a depth of the magma source of only 4.3 kilometers. That is shallow, guys. Same basically as the magma chamber in Iceland and in Campi Flegrei in Italy. That is rumbling quite a bit. So they say, but even if they would add the sun station, it would basically be almost the same effect. It would be at a depth of 4.8 kilometers, which is also very, very shallow. It's not far to potentially reach the surface. And then they compare it with where was the magma chamber in the 2011-2012 crisis. It was at a depth of 3.7 kilometers. And now we're coming to the interesting part. What's the volume that has been injected in the magma chamber? And they can calculate this based on the observed motions that they have observed over the years. So they're using the data of SUNT and 048A because they're closer to the source. The one very far south, SANU, is less sensitive and has less weight for assessing the volume in the magma chamber. So their estimate for the volume that is stored in the magma chamber at 4.3 kilometers depth during the inflation period did last until January 1st, 2025, is 6.5 millions of cubic meters. It's not super big. We know in Iceland it can go up to like 12 million cubic meters or even more right now, and it's not triggering catastrophic eruptions, although that's a different kind of volcano that we're dealing with in Iceland with the fissure eruptions than Santorini. That is different. And what does that correspond to if you assume that this is the fill amount? It corresponds to a maximum uplift at the vertical area of the source of 190 millimeters, that's 19 centimeters. And now, if they assume an average duration of the inflation of 170 days, that would give them a daily uplift rate above the center of that reservoir. So 1.1 millimeters per day, 33 millimeters per month. Okay. Has that volume in that magma chamber changed between early January 2025 and their latest measuring data, February 12, 2025? This is what's most interesting, because that would tell us, is there a magma intrusion? Is there magma flowing out? Is that causing the earthquakes? So they say the vertical displacement of the SUNT station shows that the deflation amplitude accounts at the date of this node for approximately half of the inflation amplitude. So they're saying this means that approximately 3 millions of cubic meters have escaped from the magma chamber, guys. So it is a magma intrusion happening. And so now, is it refilling and then same thing again? Is it refilling and same thing again? Interesting what they're saying now. Assuming that this magma has filled a lateral dike, as it is most often the case in many volcanoes, right? And let's assume that for such a dike that is buried at some depth in the upper crust, because magma is always looking to come to the surface, has probably a width of 1 kilometer and a length of 30 kilometers. So you can say this is a magma dike, and we see the earthquake swarms around this magma dike. The thickness would not be much then. That's what they're saying, and that's kind of surprising. And I'm wondering if that's an error, but they say 0.1 meters only, like 10 centimeters, that would be very small. But also 3 million cubic meters is not a lot. And they're also saying such a value is small for a magma intrusion in a dike. But it has been observed elsewhere, and it's not impossible that this is the case. So guys, does that give us more clarity what could be happening there? I think so. At least I think it increases the probability that magma is somewhat involved in this unrest here. One thing that leaves them a little bit speechless is they don't have an explanation why we see these fast moving motions towards the north. But they have installed another GNSS receiver at the island of Anidros just on February 12th. And that is really good. It's a very, very small island. You see it here. But it's important because it's basically east of Santorini, and it also shows already some results from February 12th. We need to see what that really means, because this is just a few hours, and if you look this over days, this could just be fluctuations. That doesn't give us a super precise indication, but at least it's there. And I think in the coming days, we can expect to see a little bit more interesting data from there. But still, I would like to hear what is going on at the Kolumbo underwater volcano. That is right where the earthquake swarm is. Why are we not hearing anything from these stations that have been installed there? That's a little sad, I have to say. Guys, this was the news that I wanted to share with you. It's very, very interesting, and still we cannot predict what's next, but maybe we can understand a little bit better what might be going on underneath Santorini. It's a possible explanation. And I have to say again, if we compare this with the magma intrusions that we have so closely been watching in Iceland, at least if you're a follower of my channel, there are similarities, and we're waiting for the next eruption in Iceland. There is the land rise. We're waiting for it, right? So yeah, guys, if you did find that interesting, please leave this video a like. Let me know in the comments. Is that too much? Is that too overwhelming with so many graphs and data, or is this of interest? I would like to know, guys. And if you like what I do, and if you want to support me and right now my dog's vet bills, go to my buymeacoffee.com/silky site. The link is in the description of this video. And also thanks for the supers you're sending me here on YouTube and for your emotional support. You're absolutely awesome. And I'll release an update on Apollo soon. It's going up and down, but I think gradually it's improving. Although I'm always scared if he has a day like yesterday where he was breathing harder. I was like, oh my God, is it starting again? Is it regrowing? But I have to stay positive. Today he was good, so I think it's normal. Guys, check the video in the end screen, please. It's really, really interesting. It matches what I just explained. I see you very, very soon, guys. Stay safe. Bye-bye.